Hello, and welcome to today's webinar, Ransomware, Phishing, and ADT. I'm Sarah Duffy, Marketing Manager here at Entronis, and I'm happy to be moderating today's session. Today, I am joined by Mike Parkin, Security Technologist at Barracuda. During today's webinar, we will be discussing the current threat landscape and how these threats impact your customers' business. Before we get started, let's do some brief housekeeping. During the webinar, if you have any questions, feel free to share them using the questions panel to the right of the GoToWebinar screen. At the conclusion of the webinar, you will be prompted to complete a brief survey. Please take a moment to tell us what you think, as we are continuously improving the content and quality of our online events. Before we get started, I'd like to take a quick look at our agenda. We'll first start with a basic introduction of the threat landscape, which will launch us into an industry landscape. After which, Mike will then discuss the anatomy of a ransomware attack, as well as some details about ransomware, including the most recent WannaCry. And then we'll wrap up with how you can use this as an opportunity to have conversations with your customers. With that said, I'd like to hand it over to today's presenter. Take it away, Mike.
Thanks, Sarah. Good morning, everyone. I'm Mike Parkin, a technical marketing engineer here at Barracuda headquarters in Campbell. My purview, my special world is Barracuda Essentials, which is the components designed to work with Office 365 and some other cloud-based stuff, which is actually ties in very well to what our folks at Entronis, our colleagues at Entronis do. I do notice I see a question about audio. Hopefully you can hear me and can hear Sarah well. I will be monitoring questions later, and I will be answering them at the end of the session. So we'll address everybody's question at the end of the session. So without ado, let me get started here. So recently, Entronis has done a fair amount of work with their partners, with you, to see what is top of mind, what's the problem, and what the biggest threats are. And not surprisingly, they found that over 50% of the respondents came back with ransomware being a huge threat. And that's an important thing, the user error being secondary and a distant second. So with that said, the Entronis research is very good in that it leads directly into the presentation I'm going to be doing for you today. And we're going to be talking about ransomware and advanced threats and how people can avoid falling victim to the different kinds of cyber attacks that we've got, and how we can protect you, as MSPs can help protect customers against these kind of attacks. So this has been in the news. This has been a big thing in the news of probably for the last several years. It started out many years ago. Some of you may remember it back when it was, kids defacing web pages back in the day, lead hackers got you. And it changed over the years. It changed to data theft. It changed to credit card and identity theft, where people would steal an identity and use it to open credit card accounts, et cetera, and loans and things, and ruin people's credit, or steal credit cards, buy things on the credit cards, et cetera. And then it's continued to evolve. It's continued to evolve the kind of threats we're seeing now, where ransomware has become the biggest threat for quite a few reasons, most of them being economic. And ransomware itself has the first indication of ransomware we actually saw back in about 2005, was the very first proof of concept ransomware malware came out back then. And it kind of didn't really evolve much. The attackers didn't start leveraging it until really 2012 is when we first started seeing it ramping up. And since then, it's ramped up very rapidly. We had one malware strain of ransomware in 2012, 5 in 2013, 8 in 2014, 27, 60, and this year for 2017, we're already on course to see over 125 different strains. These aren't just individual variants. These are actually different strains of malware, specifically ransomware, that we're seeing and expect to see over the course of the next year. So it just keeps getting worse. And as somebody, I've been in the industry myself for over 20 years, I've been in security itself for close to 20. And I've been a penetration tester, I've been security operations, I've sat on both sides of the desk, and I can only see this becoming, it's kind of a low-hanging fruit thing. It's something that's just going to keep becoming more of a problem for people as it goes. We did some work with Osterman Research, Mike Osterman, and one of his findings was that 30% of all organizations he surveyed had been infected with ransomware. That they were 30% they were willing to admit they had been infected by ransomware. And that's a fairly high number, you know, almost 1 in 3. So you can imagine that your customers are seeing it as well. You guys are going to be encountering this because, you know, indiscriminate nature of it, they send it out to whoever they want. And the numbers can be pretty high. Now, this 3.8 million number, it's an average, and that is driven up by a few very high-profile, you know, small number of high-profile breaches. But the reality is that the sheer number of breaches is very high. We've got, you know, about $150, $155 average cost per stolen record when it came to data theft. So for a small organization, you know, for a shop that's, you know, 5 or 10 people, they're never going to see a $3.8 million breach, obviously. But, you know, if they are getting 10, 100, 1,000 records stolen, that's a lot of money for a small house. So while the actual dollar value is lower than, you know, than a Sony would worry about, for a small business, that's, you know, very substantial. You know, even a few $1,000s of a hit that's painful for them. And that's something we recognized. So one of the things we've seen with the evolution of this with ransomware and malware in general, malware continues to evolve, but ransomware in particularly, because that's such a high percentage of people caring about, is that it's continuing to morph, and what's it going to morph into? Right now, you get an infection, your files get encrypted, your customers' files get encrypted, and they pay the ransom or they don't. But what's going to happen when they've installed a backdoor, they're staying in your system, and they say that we're going to decrypt your files now, here's the key, and this key is good for 6 months, and 6 months you have to pay us another $1,000 to get the new key, or we're going to re-encrypt all your files. So basically paying for protection. You know, which is basically what organized crime was doing. You know, you watch any TV show, you'll see the guys going around collecting their protection money. Well, there's a problem with that from this perspective, is that these are different gangs. And these may have no doubt, these are criminal organizations. This is not just the kid in the basement. This is a business model they have. So what's to prevent, you know, I paid my ransom to one guy, they gave me the key. What's to prevent me getting attacked by somebody else? What's to prevent them saying, pay us your ransom, and we'll give you your files back. I paid the ransom, they give me the key doesn't work, and well, I have no recourse. You know, I can't go and say, you didn't pay me, you didn't give me the thing I paid for, I'm going to sue you. That's ultimately one of the things that we mentioned WannaCry earlier, Sarah mentioned it, is one of the things with WannaCry encrypted files, the people who paid the ransom found out that the keys they were given did not work. So you could not decrypt from WannaCry. So it's probably fortunate that it had a widespread base. It didn't have as much of a financial impact as people had feared it might, which was probably a good thing. So the question is this getting worse? And the answer is yes, very, very definitely it is. Now, while our defenses are improving, the defenses you can offer people are improving, the reality is the sheer volume of threats keeps going up. So even as we add 9s to that 99.9% catch rate, even as we add 9s, the fact that the volume of attacks is going up means there's still the chances of things getting through. There's still those 0 days. There's still those custom attacks. It makes it very, very difficult to stay ahead. It's something I'm going to go into in a little bit and explain why that's it's something to be concerned about, but it's not something to be, terrified of. Again, some Osterman research, 29% of organizations had malware. Of the 30 he said that had malware, 29% of them didn't know where the malware came from. They didn't know whether it was through an email, they didn't know whether it was through a drive-by website, they didn't know whether somebody had downloaded a file somewhere or brought in a thumb drive or anything else. And that's something I find kind of intriguing, because back when I was doing penetration testing, we would examine different approaches and we could always find some way that we could get in. Made it always an interesting concept when when your job is to break into banks, to find out that you always could. Security threats are very common. We're looking at how many people have had break-ins of one kind or another, and 51% had reported between 1 and 5, and over 11%, more than 1 in 10, had reported more than 10 incidents. Now, he's including some larger companies here, so 10 incidents for a company of 10,000 people, proportionally, that's not that big a deal. But the reality is, it's still, there's a high percentage of these things are getting in. If you're a 10-man shop and you've had 2 or 3 get in, that's a high percentage. 25% claimed that they had not had any breaches. And one of the things that has been kicked around, one of the terms we hear kicked around, is that there's 2 kinds of companies: the companies that know they've been breached and the companies that don't yet know they've been breached. And there really are some companies that have never been breached. It is possible to run a super tight ship, and especially if you're a small shop. But the reality is that a lot of the companies that have never been breached just don't know it. There was time, it was 18 months from time to break in. The number of days has gone down considerably. Now I think it's on the order of about 3 months, 118, 110 days between the time of a breach and the time of it being noticed. So we as an industry have gotten much better at detecting these breaches when they happen, but the reality is they still happen, they still fly under the radar. Something further, and there's 2 key takeaways I had that I found very interesting with Mike Osterman's research, is that between ransomware, malware email, malware web browsing, and phishing, 2/3 or more of the decision makers, the information security people, whoever is in charge of it, 2/3 of them consider those 4 things to be top of mind, high risk. And one of the things I had actually included on this slide on purpose is that very bottom one, physical theft. I'm sure many of you remember not that many years ago when losing a laptop, losing an external drive, disks, whatever, was a top of mind thing. We would get news reports of somebody's laptop being forgotten on a train and secure information being released because the drives weren't encrypted, etc. And now physical theft has become less than a third. Less than a third of the IT security people are considering, the decision makers are considering physical theft to be a major issue for them. And nearly 20% consider it a low risk. They don't care particularly. And there's a number of reasons for that. One of the biggest ones is that so many people are encryption on hard drives has become ubiquitous at this point, so that losing the drive is not necessarily a big deal, because unless they have the passcode, they can't get into it. So that's actually a good thing. 51% of the organizations that Osterman interviewed said their malware issues are getting worse, not better. And that comes, I personally think that's really from the sheer volume of attacks we're seeing as these volumes keep going up continuously, even as our defenses get better. There are more and more different attack surfaces, different ways these people are trying to leverage to get into people's organizations, to either ransom things, steal things, etc., whatever it is they're after. I'm actually going to talk about that a little bit more later in this presentation. So let's see, it's getting worse. Obviously, it's getting worse. And the question is, why is it getting worse? And the answer is simple. The answer is money. What is the reason most things get done? Is there, resources. People are in it for the money. That the very, very earliest days of hacking websites was more for prestige, more for bragging rights, but very quickly evolved to being monetary, and now is pure monetary. These attacks are getting more and more sophisticated as time goes on. I'm sure if you ever check in your spam, junk mail, your spam filters, wherever you happen to be, whatever tools you have to be using for your email client, you still see all the Nigerian scams, you see the 419s, you see all that kind of junk mail. That's not sophisticated. That's not the stuff we're talking about. That's not the stuff we're worried about. These have become much more sophisticated. These are people using Bitcoin. These are people who are actually creating business models based on ransomware. There are places you can go on the dark web, and I'm not going to provide links, where you can get a turnkey solution where you decide who you're going to attack and what you're going to go for and how you're going to deliver your payload, and everything is there for you. You pay the people who wrote it some money or some percentage of your take, and they build you the infrastructure, they build you custom malware, everything's good to go. These things are businesses to the point where they have nobody, how many people here, how many people on this call actually know how to use Bitcoin? I do because I had to. I've never actually done a Bitcoin transaction. Very few people ever have. Bitcoin's a coin of choice. They have a help desk. The attackers have a help desk. The thing comes in encrypted, your files have been encrypted, pay the ransom to get your key. We take Bitcoin. Here is how you get Bitcoin. If you're having trouble, call this number or go to this website, and our friendly help desk will help you. And I wish I was kidding. That's the level of sophistication that we're seeing in the wild for these kind of attacks. Part of what makes this so difficult to defend against is the breadth of data where people are working. You don't have the old model where it's the office and everyone on the network in the office is protected by the firewall. It's not the way it is anymore. People are using their applications wherever they are. Here in the Bay Area, I'm based in Campbell, California. I live up closer to San Francisco, not too far from the airport there. And on our major highway between San Francisco and San Jose, Interstate 280, they have commuter buses that run. They run from the city, they run down here. And about half of them offer free Wi-Fi on board the bus. So you got people who are on a bus commuting to work, doing work. You have people who are in a cafe. They're at Starbucks, they're at Dunkin' Donuts, they're at Pete's, they're at the local mom and pop web cafe. They've got internet access there. You take your tablet, your phone, you can work from the park over, one of the phone providers' networks. So it's not really, nobody is sitting inside the office anymore. They work. People work from home. People work from everywhere. It makes defenses much more difficult. So enough about that. Hopefully I've given you the good idea of the economics behind it, why these problems are happening, what the levels are, so you can understand what your customers are facing as MSPs. But now I'm going to go into the anatomy of attack, and I'm going to step away from statistics and markets and things like that, and talk about how this actually happens, what's going through the mind of an attacker when they're coming in. This is a very abstract. Many of the features I'm going to talk about here in the attack are not necessarily going to exist in every attack, and that's okay. This is an example, somewhat abstract. So without further ado, let me get started on the meat of this. So we're going to talk here about a multi-vector attack. It's both multi-vector, and this is kind of the anatomy of attack. I'm going to go through the different steps. So the first step you're going to have is reconnaissance. Now, assuming it wasn't just a splash, I'm going to shotgun it and just go for everybody. I'm actually going to recon. I'm actually going to target. And the most dangerous attacks are the ones that are actually targeted, because they're not your 419 scam. They're the ones where the people have done their homework and they actually know who their target is. And I can pretty much guarantee that some of your customers are going to be targeted. Even small shops, sometimes there's people will go after them for any one of a number of reasons. So once the recon is done, I try to compromise the system. I get my payload inside my target network. Once my payload is inside the target network, I can move laterally. I can get to different systems. The person who I compromise may not be my target. I may be trying to either get to a server, I may be trying to get to something else. This, by the way, was where WannaCry was different than previous ransomware we'd seen. WannaCry actually automated lateral motion, which is something we really hadn't seen before in ransomware type attacks. Malware installation, I consider this is separate from that initial compromise where you've been hacked. This is where I'm actually injecting some kind of rootkit, some kind of toolkit, something onto the workstation or server that is actually the tools I want to work with beyond that small initial payload that got me in the first place. That was my sledgehammer to the lock. Now that I'm inside, I can start doing what I want to do and use the tools that really work for me. I obfuscate what's going on. I obfuscate my communications channels back. I go low and slow. I encrypt. I piggyback on conventional communications. I do any one of a number of things to try to avoid IDS, try to avoid the notice of perhaps a live operator, if you have a security ops person there. And then finally, we say damage, deface, and seal. Damage, don't get that much of that anymore, though. If you've been following the news, we've seen Anonymous, over the last few years has periodically gone after people for political reasons. Other organizations will go after sites for political reasons. Various political parties, political candidates, businesses may get attacked and defaced. But reality is the biggest thing right now is theft. People are either going for ransomware to steal money, they're stealing credit cards, they're stealing Sony had movies stolen. If you're an R&D facility, or some kind of medical, you may end up having literally information, your intellectual property stolen, or customer information. Now let's jump into this attack. So this is a hypothetical. This is my hypothetical headquarters, small business. I've got a few people. They work at the office. They're behind a firewall, which is protecting more of a conventional thing. And in their environment, they've got a few servers that are running. They've got Exchange on-prem. They've got some web applications running. They've got their resource management, et cetera, some servers and databases. And I have an attacker outside who wants to get in. Why? Not really important in this particular scenario. So the first thing they're going to do is they're going to start the reconnaissance. So the recon is, you'd actually be very surprised that, if you looked at your own organization, looked at some of your customers' organizations, you would see just how much information is available out there, how much we make publicly. LinkedIn, huge amount of data available on LinkedIn. Facebook, a huge amount of data available on Facebook. You can go through any one of a number of different resources in order to find information out about them. So for this scenario, me as the attacker have found that the director of IT for this fictional company, Universal Impost, is a guy by the name of John Kimball. So I can leverage that information and find out that there's I have a target inside there, a guy named Doug Quaid, and I send an email to Doug saying, hey, your credentials are going to expire. In order to keep working, click on this link, follow this link, and that will just, you can update your password and you can keep working without a problem. And my link may be a good spoof of a password change website. It may just be a dead link, but as far as links go, but what's actually happening is that link is letting me infiltrate some malware onto Doug's workstation, which is my target. I've now gotten Doug infected. In this case, I'm not dropping ransomware. In this case, I want to move further. I want to go laterally within this organization. So I'm actually dropping some kind of attack that's going to let me leverage that I've gotten to access to his workstation and lets me exfiltrate information. I will answer the question about 419 later. It's a form of scam, and I'll actually come back to that, a very specific form. So I exfiltrate the identity credentials. I exfiltrate some data about him. I learn more about Doug. That lets me know what he's got access to and what I can do with that access to see if it gets me to where I need to go. And in this case, I found that Doug has access to the database server. I've got his user ID. I've got his password. And I can now get access to the database server. I can move laterally through this corporate network. And I can go anywhere to a number of places. In this case, I wanted to get some information from their database, but I'm going to go further than that. I'm actually going to install a backdoor into the web application, and that compromise is actually really good for me as the bad guy. I replaced that initial compromise malware on Doug's system so I can keep access to him. I install a rootkit on the web server or some other way to get a link to the web server, get locked in there so I can keep communication with it, and set it up so that now I've got the web server, I've got the web application. Now what's kind of scary about that conceptually is that now I can start compromising your users. So your server is compromised when your users log in, or your customers, their customers are logging in. I can now start gleaning their user IDs and passwords. And whether that's particularly my target or not, that's something I can conceivably, that's data for me that I could conceivably use to break into other applications of other organizations using that user's credentials, because how many people reuse their credentials? Got a great password, hard to break password, so I reuse it all over the place. Well, once it's been compromised once, it can be compromised multiple times so somebody can grab it. I obfuscate my data exfiltration. Somebody use an encrypted back channel to get things out of this organization. So I'm sucking data out. And I'm doing it in such a way that you don't really see what's going on. I can break things if I want to. I don't particularly want to in this scenario. I could deface your website if I wanted to. Again, not something I want to do in this scenario. But in this scenario, I definitely want to be stealing things from you. That is my target here. I'm trying to steal data. So I suck this data out of the system, and I've got, let's say if this was Universal Imports, their product database, price sheets, things like that, some of their contract information that I'm going to use, and I'm going to sell it to a competitor. I may be the competitor. I may be a government organization who's doing this. This may be a state-sponsored thing, and that's something I didn't really mention earlier, but that's actually a huge number of incidents in the wild. The infamous Stuxnet, for example, was actually created by a government organization who will remain nameless because they always go by their three-letter acronym, to attack certain pieces of sophisticated equipment used by a government that they weren't happy with. So I get all this information out, and now I'm a happy hacker. I've got the data, I can sell it, I can do whatever I want. I can also do some other kind of crazy things here. I can infect another machine with ransomware. I'm inside the network, right? So there's that 29% who don't know where it came from. This is me, I'm inside. I find one of Doug's colleagues, I drop a ransomware on them. Just one. Somebody who's a mobile user, make it look like they came, they picked it up at they were out at the coffee shop using the web there. I get a ransomware. I can do that. I'm inside their network. Now, many of your customers will have already gone over to the cloud. Either they're running their own applications in the cloud, they've got AWS or Azure, and they've pushed their application out there, they're running it in the cloud, or they're using Office 365, Exchange Online for their email, and maybe using Google, any one of a number of different SaaS applications, and there are many of them, and it's a huge, huge market. One of the things that you think about is that, well, who protects that? The reality is that the companies who provide the infrastructure for the cloud aren't necessarily protecting their applications. They might offer a service where they offer, a web application firewall or something similar, but what they are concerned about, their world, is protecting their own infrastructure. AWS, Microsoft, they do a phenomenal job of protecting their infrastructure. They really do. Trying to actually hack the basis of Azure or the basis of AWS is very difficult. But having your web app hacked, not their problem. That's the customer's problem. So to reiterate that, cloud service providers, the providers, care about the security of the cloud. They're caring about the infrastructure. It's you, your customers, who are concerned with the application in the cloud. So what have we learned so far? We've learned that there are a myriad of threats out there. I talked about only a fraction of them, but there are quite a few. There are a number of threat vectors, many ways that people can deliver those threats, everything from email to compromised websites to a personal favorite of mine from when I was pen testing was dropping a thumb drive somewhere in a parking lot, or a CD or DVD with video of CEO's last presentation. And it really is a video of the CEO's last presentation. There's also something running on there that compromises the system when you load it up and run the auto execute. And there's quite a large attack surface. Firewalls are still an attack surface, not as much as they used to be, because firewall technology has gotten better and better and better. But there are many, many ways still to get in to organizations. And the users, realistically and sadly, but realistically, the users are actually the weak link. Humans are the problem. So how can Barracuda help? How can you help your customers? So we offer a number of things, and we look at this from a perspective of detect, prevent, and then recover. So detection is not detect, this is not intrusion detection. This is an IDS. This is actually understand things that may already be in the network. Prevent is the IDS, the real-time stuff. And we have a number of offerings in that space. And then recovery, in case things have gone bad, and I don't want to say they will, but the reality is, even with the best defenses, even with good process, things still sometimes happen. And we know, we have to admit that. No defense is 100%. So the recovery facet is there for those edge cases where our defenses were good, but they weren't perfect. So on detect. So first side of detect is the Barracuda email threat scanner. This is a web-based tool that scans Office 365 email accounts, so Office 365 and Exchange Online, scans for threats that may already exist. So assuming that people have, had email come in that didn't get caught, but if they don't have Barracuda's tools in the first place, they got EOP, which is included with Office 365. Good tool, not spectacular tool, but a good tool. Things may have gotten in. This tool, this free scan, actually lets you see what may already be in there. So it provides you reports and recommendations. It's not a remediation tool. So someone could use the report to remediate manually, but it is not itself a remediation tool. So on the prevention side, we have a number of tools, a number of applications to help you prevent these attacks from getting in. Barracuda Essentials, this is actually my personal realm. My role as a TME is I'm the TME for Essentials, and some of the related products. I do a bunch of other email-related things. But this is a comprehensive security archiving and backup solution for Office 365 and Exchange. Works with on-premises and hybrid. It's a very cool product, and it's built on our proven SaaS solution. So it's a very, very easy to use per user pricing. Very, very simple model. Easy to deploy. We have link protection, which is part of the whole platform. Link protection is security for actually links. In an email, things will get rewritten if there's a link included in the email. That gets rewritten to be a safe link. You go to our service, which is a redirect. If it's an okay link, it's cool, no problem. We redirect you to the site, we get out of the way. It's actually hostile. We'll redirect you to a warning page that says, hey, this was categorized as this one of a number of different categories of bad site. You probably don't want to go there. And in case you really want to know more, here's some user training. There's a user training video that will help you understand the kind of threat you're seeing. And we do against typo squatting, which is a very common thing for some of the more sophisticated attacks. I've seen one recently where I've gotten email. I have a chase.com account. I have one of my credit cards. And I ended up getting CHASSE.com, and extra S's in there, and several other similar ones that, you know, added an extra N or an extra I or something in a way that doesn't work. My personal favorite on this is the homograph, where you see example.com. If you look at your screen, you look at the presentation, it says example.com, the second one. That P is not a P, it's the Greek letter rho, which is a human. I read that as example.com, right? Just a weird font. Something else I think is kind of cool is the misspellings. The MIT, I believe it was, did a study in which they said, found out that if the first letter is correct and the last letter is correct, and I take all of the correct letters in the middle and scramble them, a human being will still be able to know what that word is. If I just skim across it and then have a scrambled word like that in the middle of a sentence, I will skim over it, full comprehension, understand the correct word, and keep going. May not even realize it's there. That's one I think is actually really cool. Just the thing about us as humans, that we can do some pretty amazing things when it comes to how we process data. So off the next generation firewall. In this case, we've got both physical appliances, web-based, where you can spool it up either in a VM, you can spool it up in AWS Azure. We do a lot of work with Microsoft. We're a big player there. A very complete network firewall is application aware, application control, fully user aware, user level control, traffic management, etc., and ability to centrally manage everything. And all of our tools, Exchange, or the Essentials, Next-Gen Firewall, any of the tools I'm talking about, all can be managed from through the same interface. One of the things that ties this all together is ATP, the Advanced Threat Protection System. And ATP is a real-time defense in depth against, mostly against zero days. It's primarily designed for. It lets us defend against any sort of threat, any sort of threat vector, and all the main attack surfaces. And it's part of the global intelligence network that we have offered here at Barracuda. And this is how this all comes together. And this is something that a couple of these tools that I realize aren't necessarily something you guys as MSPs will offer, but this is something that is why ATP, which you can offer, is so powerful, is that there's a lot of machine learning going on. And machine learning, in order to be effective, needs a lot of data. You gotta feed it a lot of data. And this is one where we have an advantage. We've got over 250,000 deployments. The number here is a little bit out of date. It's 240,000. It's actually, it's like 255, something like that now. But we've got over 250,000 deployments where we're feeding it from all of our tools. The entire Barracuda security portfolio feeds into ATP. So even if you're only using one of the subsystems, even if you're only using Essentials, you get the advantage of that whole ecosystem. We're protecting against network, email, web. We can protect your mobile users and applications. And this is being fed from all these things. Plus, customers are manually submitting it. We have honeypots, we have crawlers, we have a team here, not here, the Campbell campus, one of our other campuses, that actually their job is to look for new threats, understand them, analyze them, and integrate defenses against them. There's some real benefits to this layered approach. The first stage is you get up to 95% of the attacks are caught through pre-filters, so that if this is something that we didn't catch in any of our previous layers, which already catches about 96, 98%, you get to the ATP, and now we've got a brand new threat. Is this a threat? It's a file I've never seen before. Let's take a look at this file, and we can examine it. We can see that, okay, this is actually just a benign PDF, no problem. Or this is a PDF that has this really obvious, bad link in it. I can block this, identify it within seconds, basically real time. Once it goes past that, we start adding on heuristics, we add on static analysis, we drop it into a CPU emulated sandbox. Don't really have the time to talk about the different flavors of sandboxing, but most sandboxes are virtual machines. Mixed blessing, virtual machines are easy to spin up, easy to analyze, but at the same time, malware can identify that it is running in a virtual machine and behave differently. And there's some things I can, if it tries to detect that, I can detect that it's trying to detect that it's in a VM, watchers watching watchers, and I can use that against it. But what we use is we use a emulation technology that doesn't look like a VM. If the tool goes out and checks, we still identify that it goes out and checks, which is, again, a strike against it. But the checks come back as, yes, you're running on real iron, so it should execute, more likely to detonate with malicious behavior. And then, as I mentioned, the machine learning, we're feeding all this information back in from multiple source feeds that minimize false positives and increase the hit rate to make it more effective. I talked about WannaCry. WannaCry was a huge thing not that long ago, I think late May, as I remember, and it started out in the UK, and it was fairly nasty. It went through, it was a ransomware, and then a part of it was using a flaw in Microsoft Windows, between older versions of Windows, that it was leveraging that flaw to spread as a worm. So one infection, all of a sudden, an entire organization be affected. To Microsoft's credit, I got to give them kudos for this. The flaw that WannaCry exploited had been patched 2 months earlier. So any organization that was current on their patches would not be affected by WannaCry's spread. This is good news. The other thing to their credit is that there were older obsolete operating systems, Windows XP, Windows 7, Windows 8, not 8.1, 8.1 is full supported, but Windows 8 is not, that they actually released patches to no longer supported operating systems because they realized there are so many of them out there and this was a problem. And that's something I got to give Microsoft credit for. So when WannaCry hit in May, it started hitting the night of May 10th into May 11th. We had this huge number of increase of hits against our advanced threat protection stuff that we were blocking. Just a massive increase. The numbers tended to be much lower. It spiked and then very quickly went down as WannaCry ran its course. So finally we get into recovery. What happens if you've been hit? And we offer Barracuda backup, cloud-to-cloud backup. Intronus offers the Echo platform. And these are very simple to deploy, easy to manage. So if something does go wrong, if the ransomware gets in, well, the reality is you just go, okay, no problem. Delete the ransomware, blow away the section of the drive that got wiped out, restore from backup, and you're out a day, half a day. You're not out a whole lot of time. Compared to, I had all my files wiped out and now we're dead in the water. The worst you're going to do if you're very obsessive about your backups, you're recovering in a matter of, you lost a couple hours of work. If you're not so obsessive about them, you maybe lost a day or so. Comparatively, not that big a deal, which is why we include the backup That's part of the solution. Bad things happen, we help you stop them. So we're offering you a comprehensive solution. You're offering your customers a comprehensive solution. So we cover any user, any application on any platform, in any cloud environment. And we include defenses from anywhere. So thank you. That is the end of my part of the presentation. In a moment, I'm going to give it back to Sarah for any further questions she's got. But I do want to take a couple of questions. I'm looking through my questions here. So let me take the questions here quickly and scrolling through them. Let's see. I see a comment about one of the attacks. So yeah, hopefully we're able to defend and recover from that. What is 419? 419 scam is the ones that cache forwarding thing. It's based on code in Nigerian law. 419 was the legal code. And it's basically the 419 scam where it's the many variants of it. Hi, I'm Prince so-and-so from Nigeria. My dad got kidnapped. I want to try to exfiltrate $1 million from my company. Will you help me? All I need you to do is either give me a bunch of information or give me money. The current one I've seen a bazillion of lately is from Benin Republic is the current one, where they're either, we have your money, we have your ATM card, we have your box consignment, it's just held up in customs or held up at the bank or held up somewhere, wire transfer us some money and then we'll send it to you. Those are classic 419 scams. Let's see. Thank you for the compliment. This has been recorded, and Sarah will be able to make this recording available to you later. And at this point, I'm going to go ahead and hand this over. The last slide here. Intronist has a free book, an ebook on a guide for dealing with ransomware as an MSP. Good reading, I highly recommend it. And I'm going to continue watching, actually Sarah and I will both continue watching the questions here. But if there are any further questions, great, we'll take them. And otherwise, I'm going to hand this over to Sarah and let her field anything anybody else has. Sarah, back to you.
Great, thanks, Mike. If anyone has any additional questions, you can submit them in the questions panel. We're here for the next 10 minutes or so, and we'll be happy to answer any of your questions. If there's specific questions or high-level questions about ransomware and how to protect your customers, feel free to submit them. Our ebook here, the Smarter MSP Guide to Ransomware, you can download it for free at intronist.com/ransomware. In this ebook, there's a lot of tips and tricks on how to help your customers through a ransomware attack, but then also how to prevent them so they never occur in the first place. And if you have any additional questions from a sales perspective and you would like to speak to someone about any of the products that Mike discussed today, you can give us a call. The phone number is below, or you can just send us an email at sales@intronist.com.
And I am always willing to field technical calls from people or technical emails from people. If you want more information on how any of the things I talked about actually work for you. If I'm not the specific person with the technical knowledge, which some of the NG firewall stuff I may have to hand off to one of my colleagues, I know who is. So we can definitely get any technical questions to the right place. And the folks at Intronist definitely know their stuff and they can loop you into me if they need to.
Great. Well, Mike, I think that's all the questions we had today. And I want to thank you for your time, and I also want to thank all the attendees for joining us.
Cool. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for listening and saying, and you're welcome. And hopefully this has been helpful to you, and we'll be able to help you with some sales and be able to help you defend your customers.